A bathroom in the 1950s was often one of the smallest rooms in the house, yet it carried a surprising amount of weight. In many homes, several people shared that same sink, that same mirror, that same tub, and that same little patch of floor. There was no shelf full of automatic sprays, no glowing plug-in in the wall, no scented beads, no hanging gels, no chemical mist fired into the air every few minutes. And still, many of those bathrooms smelled cleaner than plenty of bathrooms do now. That sounds strange at first, especially when modern stores give us a whole aisle of products meant to fight odor. But the women keeping those bathrooms in order were not waiting for a bad smell to appear so they could cover it up. They were stopping the room from turning stale in the first place. If old household wisdom like this matters to you, subscribe and stay close. These quiet routines from earlier homes still have a lot to teach us. Especially when they solved problems modern products still have not fully fixed. The real difference was not that 1950s housewives had some secret fragrance the rest of the world forgot. The difference was that they understood something simple. A bathroom turns unpleasant when moisture sits still, fabric stays damp, air gets trapped, and little messes are allowed to remain until they build into a bigger one. Freshness was not something they sprayed into the room at the end. It was something they protected all day long. That is why one of the most important bathroom habits from that time had nothing glamorous about it at all. It was air, fresh air, moving air, dry air. In many homes, a bathroom window was cracked open for part of the day whenever weather allowed it. If there was no window, the door might be left open after use, so steam would not stay trapped inside. A hot bath or shower could leave the room damp for hours if nobody paid attention. Women noticed that. They knew the smell people called bathroom smell was often not only about the toilet, it was also about wet towels, warm air, damp corners, and water that never really dried. Modern bathrooms often work in the opposite way. The room gets closed up. The fan may not run long enough. Towels stay bunched together. A bath mat stays wet. A laundry basket sits in the corner collecting yesterday's moisture. Then a scented spray gets used as the final touch, as if perfume can do the work that dry air never got the chance to do. That old system started much earlier. It asked a different question. Not, how do I make this smell nice, but what is making this room hold on to odor at all? So a 1950s housewife might wipe the sink after morning use, straighten the towel, open the room a bit, and make sure nothing wet was left to sour the air. That did not take long. It was rarely a grand cleaning session. It was more like a reset so small it almost disappeared into the day. Yet that tiny reset changed what happened over the next several hours. A dry sink did not develop that stale smell around the drain. A towel hung properly had a chance to air out. A room with moving air never developed the same heavy feeling as one kept closed and damp. This was especially important because bathrooms in that period were usually used harder than many modern ones. Families were often larger, homes were smaller. One bathroom might serve parents, children, and guests. The room could not be ignored for long without everyone feeling it. That pressure helped create discipline. The bathroom had to stay ready, not only because people cared about cleanliness, but because daily family life kept passing through it. A smell in that room would not stay hidden. There was also a different idea of what fresh meant. Today, many people connect freshness with a strong scent. Citrus, lavender, linen, ocean breeze, pine. The room is supposed to announce itself. In older homes, freshness often meant the opposite. It meant the room smelled clean, plain, almost neutral. Soap, air, clean towel, maybe a faint trace of powder. Nothing fighting for attention, nothing trying to prove itself. The best bathroom was not the one shouting perfume across the hallway. It was the one that gave you no reason to think about odor at all. Do you remember an older bathroom that smelled clean without smelling artificial? A lot of people do, even if they cannot explain why. It was often not one product. It was the feeling of dryness, order, and a room that had been quietly checked before problems had time to settle in. That is what made these routines so effective. They prevented instead of reacting. A woman did not need to wait for Saturday cleaning day to deal with the bathroom. She handled pieces of it while the room was still easy. A quick cloth across the porcelain, a rinse around the sink, a towel spread out instead of dropped, a window raised a little. These actions were so ordinary that they hardly looked like a system, but together they created one. Of course, that does not mean the era was easy. For many women, the expectation that the home stay presentable at all times brought real pressure with it. The point is not to pretend everything was better. The point is to notice that some routines worked because they were steady, small, and built around cause and effect. A bathroom stayed fresher because women paid attention to the first signs of dampness and disorder, long before any bad smell had the chance to grow. And that leads straight to the heart of the old trick itself, because air and dryness were only the beginning. Many women also kept one simple household item nearby to quietly absorb odor before the room ever needed to be rescued. Fresh air helped, but it was not the whole story. Many 1950s housewives also relied on a quieter method that fit perfectly with the way they ran the rest of the home. Instead of pumping a stronger scent into the bathroom, they often kept something nearby that could absorb stale odor before it spread through the room. This was the real logic behind the old trick. Remove what you can, dry what you can, absorb what remains. That approach sounds almost too plain to matter, yet it worked because it dealt with the problem itself instead of arguing with it through perfume. One of the simplest tools for this was baking soda. Today it is still sold as a household staple, but in earlier homes it had a more active daily role. Women used it in refrigerators, on sinks, around drains, and in places where smells had a habit of building. A small open container placed discreetly in the bathroom could help pull in stale odor from the air without adding any scent of its own. That mattered because the goal was not to make the room smell floral or fancy. The goal was for nothing unpleasant to greet you when you stepped inside. In a well-kept bathroom, the clean smell was almost invisible. That idea says a lot about how women in that period thought about housekeeping. They were not trying to create a dramatic result in 5 seconds. They were trying to stop trouble from gathering. The bathroom did not need a loud rescue because it was being managed in small ways all week long. An open dish of baking soda, changed when needed, fit naturally into that system. It cost little, asked for little, and worked best in the background. That was very much the spirit of 1950s household care. The strongest methods were often the least flashy. Some homes used other simple materials depending on region, habit, or what older relatives had passed down. Powdered cleansers, charcoal-based absorbers, or plain homemade solutions sometimes appeared in utility spaces and bathrooms. The details could vary from family to family, but the thinking stayed remarkably similar. If the room had a smell, it needed to be aired, dried, cleaned, or absorbed. Covering it up was never the first answer. That does not mean scented products did not exist at all. Soap, talc, and gentle powders were part of everyday life. But there was a clear difference between a room smelling lightly of cleanliness and a room being drowned in fragrance to hide what had been neglected. Modern bathrooms often blur that line. The room may smell like pine, lemon, linen, or even vanilla, yet still feel damp or slightly stale underneath. That is because fragrance can sit on top of an unchanged environment. A wet mat is still wet. A sour towel is still sour. A toilet base that has not been wiped is still holding odor. Women in earlier homes would have recognized that right away. They knew there was no point making a room smell sweeter if the source of the smell was still quietly working underneath it. The old absorber trick also had another advantage. It matched the modest, practical mood of the room. A 1950s bathroom was not usually treated like a showroom. It was expected to be neat, plain, useful, and ready. So anything that could help without drawing attention to itself was especially valuable. A hidden little dish, a box tucked into place, a simple supply kept on hand for weekly refreshing. These were not luxuries. They were part of maintaining a shared room with very little fuss. In that sense, the trick was not really about a single substance. It was about a mindset. A woman noticed where odor gathered and quietly put something there to reduce it before it became part of the room. That kind of thinking also explains why the trick worked better in the past than it sometimes does for people trying it casually today. It was never meant to replace cleaning, it was meant to support it. Baking soda could help absorb stale air, but it could not fix a damp towel left crumpled in the corner. A powder could help near a drain, but it could not solve fabric that had been holding moisture for 2 days. The old system was layered. First came ventilation through an open window, then dryness for every porcelain surface, then light daily wiping with a clean cloth, then an absorber to catch what might still linger. Remove one of those layers, and the result weakens. There is also something worth noticing in the kind of freshness these women accepted. They did not seem to require the bathroom to smell special. They wanted it to smell clean, empty of offense, almost forgettable. That standard feels very different from the modern habit of assigning every room a branded scent. An older bathroom might have carried a trace of soap, starch from clean linens, maybe a mild powder on the vanity. That was enough for a clean home. If the room felt aired out and under control, it had done its job. Do you remember seeing baking soda used that way in an older home, not as a trend, but as an ordinary part of housekeeping? For many families, it was simply there, as normal as a rag under the sink or a bar of soap by the basin. No one needed to make a speech about it. It belonged to the house the way these routines did. What makes this old trick so interesting is that it reveals a larger truth about the era. These women were not depending on one miracle product. They were depending on steady attention and a few simple materials that made attention more effective. The absorber helped hold the line, but it could only do that because the room was not being asked to fight against piles of wet fabric, trapped steam, and neglected clutter. And that brings us to one of the biggest reasons those bathrooms stayed fresher than many modern ones. The true battle was often not in the air itself, but in the towels, washcloths, bath mats, and damp fabric that could sour the whole room if nobody handled them properly. The hidden enemy in an older bathroom was not always the toilet or the drain. Very often it was damp fabric. A room could be scrubbed, aired, and carefully arranged, yet still lose that feeling of freshness if the towels, washcloths, bath mat, or laundry were left holding moisture hour after hour. Women in the 1950s understood that in a practical way because they lived closer to the consequences. Homes were smaller, bathrooms were shared, and there was not much distance between one person's habits and the whole house feeling them. If a towel stayed wet and sour in a tiny bathroom, everybody knew it. That is why towels were handled with far more discipline than they often are now. A used towel was not supposed to sit twisted in a heap on the floor or bunched over the side of the tub. It was spread out properly on a rack, a line, or a bar so air could move through it. The point was not only tidiness, the point was drying. A towel that dried quickly stayed fresher, and a fresher towel protected the whole room. In a shared family bathroom that mattered every single day, washcloths followed the same logic. They were rinsed well, wrung out, and hung where they had a chance to dry instead of mildew. Bath mats were also watched closely, especially in homes where children were in and out of the tub and water easily reached the floor. A mat that stayed damp could quietly change the smell of the room, even if the sink shined and the mirror looked clear. An older housewife might shake it out, hang it, wash it, or simply refuse to let it stay wet for long. That habit sounds small, but it reveals the whole system. Freshness was protected at the level of ordinary fabric. Dirty laundry was another issue, and many women treated it more carefully than people do now. Clothes that were sweaty, undergarments that had been worn all day, wet pajamas or used washcloths were not always left sitting in an open bathroom hamper. If they remained in that warm little room, they added to the very odor the woman was trying to prevent. In many homes, the better choice was to move laundry out. Keep it contained or handle it sooner. A bathroom could not stay fresh if it also became a holding place for yesterday's damp clothing. This may be one of the clearest differences between the older approach and the modern one. Today, the bathroom is often expected to do too many jobs at the same time. It becomes a wash space, dressing space, laundry drop zone, storage closet, and product shelf all in one. That extra burden changes the air of the room. The more fabric, clutter, and moisture allowed to collect there, the harder the room has to work to feel clean. In the 1950s, women often did not have the luxury of space, so they had to manage that burden with rules. Fewer things stayed in the bathroom. Wet items were dealt with faster. Air had a better chance to move through the room. The same discipline showed up around surfaces. A sink rim did not stay wet all day if someone had the habit of wiping it after use. The edge of the tub was not left with little pools of water. Splashes around the toilet base, if noticed, were not ignored for 3 days. Small traces of moisture and soil were dealt with while they were still easy. That is what made the room feel consistently fresh. It was not a dramatic cleaning sprint, it was early prevention. There is something almost invisible about this kind of housekeeping because it leaves so little to notice. You do not walk into such a bathroom and admire one heroic product. You simply feel that it is under control. The towel is dry enough to use. The floor is not carrying yesterday's bath. The laundry is not turning warm and stale in the corner. The room smells like soap, water, air, and clean fabric rather than a struggle between dampness and perfume. That quiet result was often the product of many small decisions repeated every day. Do you remember a bathroom where the towels always seemed dry, folded, and ready, even in a busy house? That detail stays in people's memory because it changed the feeling of the whole room. A dry towel signaled that someone had already thought ahead. The space had been reset for the next person instead of abandoned after the last one. This also helps explain why modern deodorizing products often feel disappointing. They try to solve the last stage of the problem without correcting the middle. If damp cloth is still present, if a bath mat is always wet, if used laundry sits in the room, a fragrance can only do so much. The old system was stronger because it attacked the conditions that fed odor. Fabric, especially damp fabric, was treated as part of the room's air. That old discipline was not about perfection for its own sake. It was about reducing labor later. A towel hung properly now meant less odor later. A mat aired now meant less sourness tomorrow. Laundry moved out now meant a more neutral room through the evening. Housewives were not creating extra work when they did these things. They were cutting off bigger work before it had the chance to grow. And after fabric, air, and moisture were brought under control, one final part of the system made the whole method hold together. The bathroom was usually given a short daily reset, a few quick actions that kept the room ready without turning cleanliness into a heavy weekend project. The last part of the system was also the part that held everything together. A 1950s housewife did not usually wait for the bathroom to become unpleasant, cluttered, or embarrassing before dealing with it. She gave it a brief daily reset, often so quick that nobody else in the house would have called it cleaning at all. That was the quiet strength of the method. The room stayed under control because it was rarely abandoned long enough to drift out of control. This daily reset was not dramatic. It could be as simple as wiping the sink after the morning rush, checking the toilet bowl and seat, hanging the towel properly, emptying a small trash bin before it became noticeable, and making sure the room could air out. A woman might smooth the bath mat, straighten the soap dish, rinse a cup, or take one last look before leaving the room. None of these actions looked impressive by themselves. Together, they stopped the bathroom from becoming a place that needed rescue. That is one of the clearest differences between old housekeeping and the way many people are forced to manage a home now. Modern cleaning often happens in bursts. The room is ignored while life gets busy, then attacked all at once after the mess has already built up. The 1950s bathroom routine aimed at something else. It kept the room close to clean all the time, so no single day had to carry the whole burden. That made the bathroom feel fresher, but it also made the work feel lighter because no one task had the chance to grow too large. This rhythm mattered in shared homes. Children left streaks, adults left steam. Guests might arrive with little warning. There was no guarantee that the bathroom would stay private or unused until cleaning day, so the room needed to remain ready. That did not mean it had to look like a magazine photograph. It meant it could not be allowed to slip into neglect. A bathroom that was reset every day could absorb ordinary family life without turning sour. The tools for that reset were usually plain and close at hand. A rag or cloth, a toilet brush, a small cleaning powder, maybe vinegar, maybe soap and hot water. Nothing fancy was required because the dirt had not been given days to harden and settle. That is what made the system so efficient. The room was easy to restore because it had never been allowed to go very far in the wrong direction. A woman was not spending half her Saturday fighting layers of buildup that should have been interrupted on Tuesday. There is also something important in the old idea of what a bathroom represented. It was not treated as a forgotten corner hidden behind a closed door. It was part of the home's overall order. If the kitchen spoke for how a family ate, the bathroom spoke for how a family cared for itself. A stale bathroom suggested that small things had been left unchecked. A fresh one suggested that the house still had rhythm. That may sound like a heavy meaning to place on one room, but older generations often thought in exactly those practical, symbolic ways. A room reflected habits. Habits reflected care. That does not mean the 1950s ideal was always fair. Many women were expected to hold this order together without praise, and sometimes without enough rest. The pressure to keep a home presentable was real, and it could be exhausting. That truth should not be erased, but neither should the skill itself. These women understood that order is easier to preserve than to rebuild. Their bathroom routine worked not because they had more free time, but because they used short pockets of attention well. A minute here prevented 10 minutes later. A quick wipe now spared a hard scrub later. A towel rehung at the right moment protected the air for the rest of the day. That is why the older system still feels relevant. The lesson is not that every modern deodorizer is useless. The lesson is that deodorizing was never meant to carry the whole job. If a bathroom is damp, cluttered, and full of used fabric, even the strongest fragrance becomes part of the confusion. But if the room is aired, dried, lightly wiped, and reset each day, it may need very little added scent at all. Cleanliness starts to do the work, fragrance has been hired to imitate. There is a kind of relief in that idea. A fresh bathroom may not require more products, stronger chemicals, or a new gadget in the wall. It may require a smaller habit repeated more faithfully. That was one of the quiet strengths of the women who ran homes in that era. They built results out of repetition, not glamorous repetition, not trendy repetition, just the kind that kept ordinary rooms from slipping away. Which of these habits would be easiest to bring back in your own home? The cracked window, the dry towel, the quick sink wipe, the laundry rule, the hidden absorber. Very few of them cost much. Nearly all of them depend more on rhythm than money. That may be the most surprising part of the whole story. The bathroom did not stay fresh because someone kept buying new solutions. It stayed fresh because the room was guided back into order every day before disorder could settle in. So the old trick was never just baking soda or a powder or a window left open. It was a small system built around air, dryness, fabric, and timing. The room was not magic. The routine was. And that is still the part worth bringing back. If forgotten household wisdom like this still matters to you, subscribe before you go. There are many more of these quiet skills worth remembering, and each one begins the same way. With a woman noticing a small problem early, fixing it simply, and leaving the room ready for whoever walked in next.